the MIT Free Speech Alliance is obviously not alone in recognizing that there's a cultural problem with MIT around the issue of civil discourse. So in true MIT fashion, there are a number of pockets with MIT that have independently started exploring different mechanisms and different means to try and address that, which is the way MIT does things. So this next panel is composed of some representative samples of people with those initiatives. Our moderator for the panel is MIT's new Vice President of Equity and Inclusion, Karl Reid. Now, Karl Reid's, I think, his biggest accolade is that he's an MIT class of '84, bachelor's and master's in course 3. So Karl went out and worked in technology for several years after graduation, and then he had a career change experience, and he decided to dedicate himself to helping improve the experience in higher education for young people, particularly underrepresented minorities. And he actually came and worked at MIT partly in that role in 1998. Subsequently to that, he held leadership positions at the United Negro College Fund, at the National Society of Black Engineers, and most recently at Northeastern University. But now, welcome back to MIT, Karl.
Thank you. Thank you, Wayne. Wonderful to be here, and thank you for your generous invitation, an opportunity to come and to speak to this conference. And you know, Wayne was one of the first people who welcomed me to the Institute. You know, coming back after 16 years, I had an appreciation for how everything has been upgraded at MIT. I actually wrote my dissertation in Hayden Library, and it turns out that's where we met, and for coffee. We had some vigorous discourse, as you would imagine, in those conversations, but we also had a shared purpose, and that is we both love MIT. We both love our experience at MIT, and that MIT should be a place where everyone should be invited to do their best work. We agree on that. And so my older brother also is an MIT alum, and we used to disagree on sort of religious doctrine, but one day we just decided, let's focus on the things we agree, and that's how I approach Wayne, like a big brother. So it's a pleasure. So last year, when the tragic attacks occurred on Israel and the war and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza unfolded, I was reading Peter Senge's The Fifth Discipline. Peter introduced this notion of a systems approach, a systems thinking, and a lecturer here at the Sloan School. And at the time, I was struggling to bring communities together at my former institution, which was increasingly becoming polarized around the conflict. Senge cited the late quantum theorist David Bohm, who suggested that there are two types of discourse in learning organizations, dialogue and discussion. Both make us capable of continual generative learning. I love that phrase, but each has a different purpose. Discussion has its etymological roots in percussion and concussion. Bohm notes his metaphor for discussion is a ping pong game, back and forth with ideas debated. The goal of discussion is to win, to have one's views accepted by the opposition. This percussive discourse is important when an organizational decision has to be made or consensus has to be reached. It makes sense, right? Dialogue, on the other hand, and this was an introduction to me, is useful when the goal is not to win or lose, but to learn together. The word comes from the Greek word, and you'll hear from Nathan, dialogos, which suggests a free flow of meaning between people. Dialogue allows groups to discover insights that are not attainable individually. The beauty of dialogue, which is often fundamental in the indigenous cultures in the US, is that not everyone needs to agree or arrive at consensus. There's no winning or losing. The goal of dialogue is collective learning, or quote unquote thinking together. So when I arrived at MIT last March, I discovered that MIT had a rich inventory of programs, initiatives, and courses that invite dialogue and educate and train members of our community in the practice. In fact, I wrote about it in the April edition of the ICEO newsletter, the Institute Community and Equity Office. I recommend you subscribe to the ICEO newsletter. What can we do to create an environment where debate and dominance are not the goal? How do we navigate relationships where we can learn together, even when there are no clear paths to winning or losing? And in fact, our exchanges and conversations I've had with Wayne and Bill and others, I've learned so much from those conversations. And we've had dialogue. We don't always agree, but we've learned together. So that's what our experts who've been doing this work at MIT will discuss in this panel. So what you see, and we had, just imagine a PowerPoint presentation with up here, but you have the PowerPoint, and thank you, Peter, for making that available and pivoting so quickly, is Sally's statement announcing my appointment, which I call a vision for inclusive excellence. And this is what most people agree, that MIT should continue to attract talent, the best talent, from across the country and around the world, right? We can all agree about that. And we can all agree that we're solving the most complex, vexing problems in the world. We've been doing this for 163 years. And we are pushing new boundaries of knowledge. In order for one to do that, we need to create an environment that is welcoming and inviting and inclusive for everyone who is attracted to Institute. And I don't think anybody can disagree about that. And there's no code, there's no hidden language in that. That's fundamentally what we're talking about. And that's what MIT has been doing for over 50 years and others in terms of its ability to attract talent and a much more inclusive talent. So a few months ago, I began to kind of do an inventory of all the services that are available on the campus. And again, you'll hear from them shortly, who do this work and who've been doing it for quite some time, down in the trenches, working with students, faculty, staff, working with different religious communities about how do we foster dialogue? How do we create this environment where people can exchange ideas, meaningful interactions that occur? And so what you see there is a grid of about 11 of these programs, some of which are going to be featured here momentarily. We pulled them together and we did a design exercise with many of them this summer to ask the questions, what are the elements of respectful, open dialogue at MIT? What can we foster? How can we foster this? Yeah, I mentioned I'm class of '84, so yeah, there we go. How can we foster constructive community dialogue at MIT at scale? And then what steps should we take to enhance dialogue across the Institute? I'm a systems thinker, I'm an engineer, and I'm always thinking about getting to scale. How do we get to scale so that we can really change the culture and climate that Wayne talked about? So we gathered these groups together, and today I'm gonna just share with you in a few of the slides here of how we've synthesized the notes from those meetings. The first area is this notion of presumptions and intentions. If someone comes in with predefined presumptions about individuals with whom they're going to interact, it shuts down dialogue or shuts down this whole notion of pool of meaning. So in order to have dialogue, you actually have some pre-work that has to be done in order to challenge perspectives, but create a kind of an open mind. We have to have the right structure and format that utilizes tools and guidelines and agreements for norms to occur. We have to have, obviously, people who are skilled in facilitating dialogue. And then, of course, we have to recognize relationships and dynamics. When there are evaluative relationships in the room, I always wondered why people were so much more free to talk when I wasn't in the room as their manager than when I was, right? And so we have to recognize those power dynamics occur, whether it's gender, et cetera, in that. So these are the elements that came as a result of the meetings of these experts this summer. And then we asked the question, how do we foster dialogue at MIT at scale? And again, this is mostly kind of obvious points, but we are working now on the next phase of that, which is what is the plan to get this to scale? Sharing practices, lessons learned, and amplify communication. Wayne, I believe, made the notion that MIT prides itself on being siloed and being decentralized. That's a good thing. When you're solving the world's most complex problems in a way, but it's not great to kind of shape a culture and environment of free expression and open discourse. So we need to kind of build those bonds, to share those practices, build connections and relationships across the Institute, embed dialogue into existing structures and build, and you'll hear that from Linda, how she's built it into the Concourse program, and then increasing capacity and resources. So recognize who's doing it well, and then giving them the capacity they need to get it to scale. So this is the framing of this discourse. This was extra. I'm not going to charge you for it, but I really want to give you kind of the platform for this area. So you'll hear from Discourse, the civil discourse in the classroom and beyond, dialogue at MIT, the Octet collaboratives, Dialogos, again, using that term again, and then you'll hear from the realtalk. So I'm pleased and I'm so thrilled to everyone I reached out to whom I reached out to invite to this panel agreed to do it. In fact, at one point I actually had another panelist who joined, but he was on a medical leave and he had to pull out because this table would have been pretty long. And so I was just honored that they agreed. So Nathan Barczi will speak first, and he's a pastor theologian devoted to theology and service to the church and human flourishing in the academic vocation by engaging the heart and the life of the mind. He earned his doctorates two doctorates in theology from the University of Nottingham and in economics from MIT. Linda Rabieh, you told me how to say it.
Doesn't matter.
Okay,
Rabieh.
Rabieh is a senior lecturer in Concourse. She received her PhD in political philosophy from the University of Toronto, Canada. Having previously taught at Colorado College and Tufts University, Linda joined the Concourse faculty in 2010. Elena Sapora brings decades of experience in facilitating dialogue. I think you are newer to MIT than I am.
Very, yeah.
Mediation practice and training. She's a certified initial mediation trainer with the New York State Unified Court System. I think they can use you right now. She has trained hundreds of individuals in the art and practice of facilitative dialogue. She earned her BA in sociology from Brandeis University. And Helen Wang is the Senior Associate Dean of Residential Life. She came to MIT with many years of experience in student life. She earned her bachelor's degree in English and psychology from Carnegie Mellon, CMU, and a master's in American Studies from William and Mary. So I've asked each to give about I said 2 to 3 minutes of introduction of not only themselves, but their programs. I will have a couple of questions for each of them, and then we'll open up the floor. I think we have, 3 hours, Wayne? Is that? Yeah. All right. Nathan?
Yeah. So hello, very happy to be here. My name is Nathan Barczi. As Karl mentioned, class of 2007 from the economics PhD program, and then subsequently got a doctorate in theology. Today I serve part-time as a pastor at a church in Newton and part-time as a chaplain here at MIT with a Christian study center called the Octet Collaborative. The Octet Collaborative is a very new organization. We launched 4 years ago. We are one of about 25 chaplaincies under the Office of Religious, Spiritual, and Ethical Life. So I'm going to do my best to represent as best I can a really astounding collection of faith communities that are at work here at MIT. But I work predominantly with the Christian community. Most of our work is with faculty and staff, but we really try to work across the institute. I'll I'll speak today mostly about our work in the area of civil discourse. Briefly, I want to mention 2 other types of work that we do. One is a wing of programming where we try to introduce ethical wisdom into questions of science and technology. We do that in both formal ways, like a course that we offer through the Media Lab, and also in informal dinner discussions and research colloquia that we're organizing. Later this year, we're offering a wing of programming trying to introduce the science and experience of wonder and awe for the MIT community and how that connects with science and engineering. But of course, mostly what I'm here to talk about is our work in civil discourse. We do 2 things in the realm of civil discourse. One is our Dialogos series. I was mispronouncing it Dialogos for a long time until a Greek speaker walked up to me and said, "Hey, there's an accent, it's Dialogos." So, all right, Dialogos.
Thank you.
So our Dialogos series, we call these intellectual hospitality dinners. We normally offer 4 per year. They're held up in the faculty club in the Sandberg Center. We offer a really nice meal. We have musical performances. And then the format, there's usually about 50 people in attendance, and the format is some expert gives a talk on some topic that is hard to talk about in the MIT context, some controversial topic. These have ranged from race and identity politics to gender, sexuality, and technology to mental health and faith. We then have a time of moderated table discussion. After the talk, there's moderated table discussion with discussion questions and a moderator, and then Q&A. And it's a chance to exercise and put into practice civil discourse. The other thing that we do is an interactive workshop called Disagreeing Well, which we offer during IAP. 4 weeks long, interactive. It's actually based on a curriculum developed by our first Dialogos speaker, who runs something called the Ideos Institute, and who trains companies, academics, government officials, whoever wants to take advantage of her services, in the art and skills of both empathic listening, but also dialogue, and having productive civil conversation. So we offer that to the whole community every IAP.
The Disagreeing Well, I think, was also captured in the free expression website that Angie Jo talked about. We actually titled that section Disagreeing Well. So I love that continuity. Linda.
Thank you. And I want to sort of say how much I'm pleased to be back here with the MFSA, because the MFSA has been a wonderful addition to the MIT community and a wonderful partner in promoting liberal education, and then especially the free and open inquiry that is absolutely necessary to liberal education. As Karl said, I'm a political theorist. I've been part of developing this Concourse program for the past 14 years. I'm here on behalf of both the civil discourse in the classroom and beyond, which is a partnership between Concourse and 2 professors of philosophy, Alex Byrne and Brad Sco. And I'll say something about both pieces of this project. So Concourse, for those of you who don't know, is a freshman learning program. The idea behind it, the substance behind it, is integrated studies in the humanities and sciences. And so what do I mean by that? We have a lot of MIT people here, so you know we offer science and math GIRs, but then we also offer a core humanities curriculum. And our core humanities program for their first year is about exploring the fundamental questions of human existence. Basically, the good life, right? And raising all the questions that would be relevant to that examination of the good life. So that's Concourse. And we partnered with Alex and Brad to get this this grant, which is a 2-year program. We're in the 2nd year of our 2-year program, and it's going so well that we're very afraid that it's going to end. And if people here have any ideas about how they can help us keep it going, that would be wonderful. The basic purpose I put here of this project is to reinvigorate vigorous dialogue about all questions at MIT with a view to knowledge, to, as Karl put it in his opening, to a greater understanding. Our audience is primarily the MIT community, although we've certainly had a lot of interest from outside of MIT for our big speaker events. But it's primarily the MIT community and especially students, and reinvigorating our students with a love of vigorous and intense debate, along with the confidence and capacity to engage in that kind of vigorous debate. So the 2 prongs of the program, we have a major speaker event where we invite 2 speakers on opposing sides of a controversial hot button issue. We've done climate change, we've done COVID policy, we've done capitalism, we've done, yes, Israel-Palestine, what next? What else have we done? And we've done the social justice movement too, and we have 3 more good ones to come this year. So we have a big speaker event where everyone in the MIT community is invited to attend. The speakers debate the issue. And then the concourse piece of that is that our students, and we're designed to take 50 students a year. We had a huge increase in applications last year, 65, so we actually expanded it to 55 students this year. All of our students are required to attend the speaker event, and then that week, we hold a corresponding debate among the students in Concourse. We actually have one tomorrow on capitalism. And so the students get a chance to hear the speaker event and then debate the issue themselves, and we have a cohort of upper class students, one of whom you will hear from later this afternoon, a former one who is here today, one of our founding debate fellow extraordinaire, Leela. And our upper class students really help us guide the freshmen in debating. And basically the goal is to make debate about these questions the norm at MIT by helping them learn how to do so productively.
Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone, and Karl, thank you so much for welcoming me to join this panel. It's an honor. As the newest member of the MIT community of this group, I joined the Media Lab in April to lead an exciting new program out of the Center for Constructive Communication. So the Real Talk at MIT program is a resource that provides training, tools, and ongoing support for tech-enhanced community dialogue projects. This is sort of a coming home full circle moment because the technology and the methodology of Real Talk was developed out of research led by our director, Deb Roy, at the Center for Constructive Communication. It's been deployed out in the world through our partner nonprofit, Cortico, and we've seen quite a bit of positive impact in different communities applying this tech-enhanced approach to community dialogue. And now, with the support of the president and provost, we're bringing it back to MIT. So the Real Talk methodology utilizes technology to record and analyze small group conversations across a community so that we can start to identify themes and insights that increase understanding and build capacity for more informed decision making. Very much in line with the definition of dialogue. The goal is not at all to win. We don't encourage debate. We really encourage the constructive learning across different experiences with an enhanced ability to draw those insights through the technology. Our proposition for the Real Talk program is it's an opportunity for community members to hear and be heard, the idea of the golden rule applied to community dialogue. Our hope and our vision is that we will be able to support MIT in becoming what we're describing as a listening campus. So through these conversations, community members have an opportunity to build community, to engage in meaningful deliberation. We have research that demonstrates how these conversations increase measures of empathy, respect, and trust across individuals in a community, and also supports individuals in building critical capacity around civic skills and civic muscle. So the ability to meaningfully contribute to our society. Concurrently with those benefits to the community, it's an opportunity for leadership to engage in what we call demonstrable listening. So really responding and listening to the insights that are derived from these community conversations. It allows them to really make more informed decisions that increase overall the sense of legitimacy and trust in those decision makers. So we're very excited. We just launched over this past orientation with some programming for incoming graduate and undergraduate students. And we're very excited to be continuing to partner with other groups around MIT, including Helen's team. But we were very hopeful and excited. There's been a very positive response so far.
And what I absolutely like, that whole notion of listening campus, I think it's kind of an under a thread that we should really be thinking about. How do we do that? But also, obviously, once you listen, you have to speak, right? But I like the approach, and we're going to come back to that, Elena, because there's a scale opportunity with Real Talk as well as a platform. So, Helen.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for inviting me to this, Karl. I'm so excited to be here. So my talk maybe will be my introduction will be a little bit adjacent to some of these conversations, because what I want to talk about is the residential platform and how we utilize that as a space to really bring these amazing hope-filled programs. I don't know, as I'm listening to my panelists here speak, I'm filled with hope for what we can do here at MIT to sustain rich dialogue in a low-stakes way. And that's what Res Life offers our students, those little organic interstitial moments where students are in their pajamas at 11 p.m., wandering the halls, trying to figure out who they are in relation to their neighbors, who they are in relation to value sets and behaviors that are just different than what they've come to MIT with. That's what I'm really interested in. So when we think about dialogue at MIT in the residential spaces, we're really trying to figure out how do we create low barriers of entry so our students can practice, so they feel like they can, in a safe space, make mistakes, right? Listen to what their voice sounds like in various contexts, whether that's at a dining hall conversation or in the elevator. And all of those efforts are guided by a faculty-governed head of house system, right? So our faculty members vision, set tone, and culture in each of the very unique residential houses at MIT. And within those cultures, we have different ways to engage dialogue. So it might look very different in Massey Hall versus East Campus, for those of you who know our campus, right? Or, dialogue in a small house like Random might be very different than a house like New Vassar. So our work really is to sit with those cultures a little bit longer to figure out what does mattering look like to them, right? And how do I bring a program like Real Talk or the exciting things about wonder and awe into those spaces that reflect the cultures of the students. Those of you who may not know, MIT's housing system is exceptionally unique because our students do a lot of this self-governance with us, right? So these houses are really created from their collective traditions and vision for what it means to be a randomite, or what it means to live in New Vassar, and we really honor that. So a big focus for me is how do we hold and preserve what's good there and grow the good from within? What does dialogue look like when we have student leaders who are really invested in their house communities, ways that I have not seen at any other institution. We do some of this work through dialogue clinics, which are offered through a staff member on my team to bring in the skill sets about dialogue to our students so they can practice that with each other, with the hope that in those down moments when you're having pizza in the hallways, you're more comfortable and confident flexing those skill sets. I'm really influenced by this idea of making sure that students know that when they are here, they matter, and when they are not in the house, they're missed. Right? Those things I think are really important in residential life, and we try to create cultures where that can be present. So I think I'll pause for now, Karl, because I think this might lead us to some other conversation.
This is phenomenal. So that sets the stage for a couple of questions, and I'm going to change the order of our questions because I do think that we really we laid the foundation for this discourse, but I do kind of sense from the earlier panel and others that you'd like us to also really speak to the current points of tension on the campus. And so Nathan, maybe you can start by really sharing your experiences, especially with religious life, right? What are the points of tension among the constituencies with which you work on campus?
Well, I think there were two that stood out to me in the last year. When we did Disagreeing Well, the capstone event for that is a dialogue. We take everything that we've learned and we have a dialogue about some topic. And we decided, with some fear and trepidation, that we really needed to talk about the conflict taking place in Gaza and its impact on our campus. It would be kind of irresponsible not to. It was so top of mind. And we did it in the form of a sort of a role play. We said, suppose we're all members of the same residential community and adjacent roommates have been putting up opposing posters and it's causing tension. And we're here to talk about what are we going to do about that. It was fruitful, it was productive, it was heated at times, as it almost has to be. Given that you're working with human beings about a situation that is undeniably tragic. Several students came up to me afterwards, actually students but also staff members and faculty, they were all part of this class, and said, that really needs to happen in my dorm. That really needs to happen in my office. And so it was clear that those tensions are out there in the residential spaces, in the workplaces, and it's hard to know what to do with them. And so workshopping that was one point of tension. The other one that I would mention, just working with a religious community, a Christian community that can hold beliefs that are not the most popular. A few years ago, our second Dialogos event was after Roe v. Wade. What next? It was just after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And we did that because we heard from so many members of our community that there is an assumption, if you're an MIT professor, then of course you're pro-choice. What else could you be? And anyone with any variation from those views. And I will say that within the Christian community I work with, there's a lot of variation within the community, not just between it and the rest of the campus. There was a sense that we can't talk about this. There's no place for dialogue at all. And so we provided that space so that there would be a place to talk about it.
One of the things I like to talk about is, like first responders, MIT students really embrace complexity, right? Like first responders running into crisis, we run into complexity, and it sounds like you've run into, complexity. What about the others? What do you sense of the tensions on the campus, and how have your programs or your initiatives really addressed it? How have you run into complexity?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. What's interesting is that we thought the reason we sought this grant and tried to begin this program is because we saw a problem before this past year. And so before the tensions that erupted this year. And the difficulties that seems to have erupted this year are somewhat different from the difficulties that we saw beforehand. And I'll just say, you said something about MIT students are great at embracing complexity. But here's one very particular problem at MIT that I noticed before even the recent conflict, which is that they are great at embracing complexity in quantitative matters. They're brilliant mathematicians and scientists, but the difficulty is that they're also human beings and citizens, and they live in a world that, in a way, the biggest questions aren't susceptible to quantitative answers. And my concern, even before this past year, was that MIT students were seeing how polarized and difficult these conversations were, and were shutting down and just retreating to a world where things are susceptible to a clear proof, and that you can sit in a room with your PSET partners and you can all agree on what the answer is going to be. And the rest of these moral and political questions, which, unfortunately, you can't get away from those questions, and especially if you're going to be a leader in this world, right? I mean, MIT students are extraordinary at creating things, but those creations are always going to be subordinate to someone else's assessment of how these creations ought to be used and where there should be restraints. And insofar as we want our students to be able to engage at that level, they have to think about those questions. They have to think about those questions, which are nothing less than, what is the good life for human beings? What do we want for people in this country? How do we want our citizens, our fellow human beings, to be? What is good for them and what is not? And where can we draw the line? And so that, I think, is a particular, it's not the only problem facing MIT students. And if I can just add one other thing, and a specific difficulty that arose this past year, and I'm addressing now the previous panel. Something that came up there is, we formulate the issue in terms of free expression. And it's true, that's the way the Supreme Court and our law formulates it. But within a university, it seems to me that we need to emphasize the logos part of dialogue, right? The reason and speech part, the free speech, a little bit less than the free expression, because what does expression indicate? You just say stuff. You say whatever you think. Speech is different. Speech is, and the Greek word logos is the word for reason too. Speech is an argument. And we need to think not just about everybody expressing whatever happens to come into their head and then having the kinds of effect or repercussions that the last panel talked about, but speech, making arguments, coming up with evidence. Frankly, the same kind of thing you do in math and science.
Brilliant point. I mean, I have to say, as an MIT student, I never ran into the word sociology or psychology, right, until I went to graduate school. Philosophy, just understanding there's a whole human dimension of our learning. I'm glad to see that we're doing a lot more in incorporating those subjects in our curriculum and building out those. But I didn't understand those. I didn't understand that we were responding to an environment in the case, and people kind of operate together in groups. So I'm thrilled to hear that. But I think we need to do better. Helen, what is your perspective on this question too, about some of the tensions?
Yeah, so I am also fairly new to MIT. I started here in October of last year, and it was in the height of a lot of things on campus. And I spent a lot of time, I bulk up my time listening to students very deeply. And students said to me something that really has guided my thinking when I consider about the complexity they're existing in. And they said, I'm really afraid that the administration is going to change what I love most about MIT. That's, because for the student, MIT is not just an institution, it's a metaphor, it's something deeper, bigger to them. And so when I think about how do I show up for students? What are the things that I'm going to focus on? It's always from that lens. I don't ever want a student to feel as if the thing that matters the most to them we're going to take away from. So I think the key is when we're in community and we're thinking about what's complicated, students oftentimes want to rush to a solution. And I find MIT students to be extremely collaborative, but we also need to give them permission to be intentionally inefficient, right, in these conversations, to dwell in the moment, to sit with the question just a minute longer. I know it makes my students crazy when it's, okay, we got a half an hour, but if you're to make meaning together, there's more than the words. There's the exchange between people. There's the feeling of the gathering, right? The gathering that you want to come back to because it was a positive experience for you or you changed as a person. Those are the things that I think we really need to hold on to at MIT, especially when we're in a community of problem solvers, right? So I want to hold the note for just a minute longer so there's resonance in the room after a student leaves.
Brilliant. I'm sensitive about time, but I do want to just ask Elena one more question because your approach is different. And in the introductions, you are also the ones who cited some of the literature as in terms of the outcomes of that work. So can you just share a little about the Real Talk and your approach, and then what have you found as a result of using the Cortigo platform? Not you, but the organization, the Center for Constructive Conversations. What have they found? Because I've always asked the so what question, right? It's good to have a discussion, and this is what I learned in my IBM training, right? Answer the so what question for a customer, and once you do, you kind of work your way backwards. So what's the so what with Real Talk?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Karl. So we found Real Talk is really conceptually hard to really understand until you experience it yourself. So invitation to anyone who'd like to learn more in that way. But there are some really incredible case studies from the work that our partner Cortico has done out in the world, even just here locally in Cambridge, for example. When Cambridge was looking to hire the new city manager, they engaged community members in dialogue to talk about their experiences as residents, what their needs were, what was most important to them, what services maybe were falling short, and the analysis of those conversations directly informed the job description that was used to hire the current manager, the city of Cambridge. Another powerful example of the approach being used very effectively, Freeport High School in Maine was experiencing a huge amount of sort of community conflict, increased distrust as a result of sort of the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And the administration of the school was doing their best to try to handle the issues, but were just getting further and further polarized from the student body. And so through a student-led dialogue initiative, they were able to capture the experiences of the student body, engage in a very thorough analysis of the themes that came up from those conversations, and present it in a way that the administration really had to pay attention. And this is now a project that's been ongoing we're in the 4th year now. And just the changes in the school culture, students have been, have had a seat at the table in terms of decision-making around culture at the school and how the administration responds to the needs. And so we know from these experiences that the framework is effective. What the research shows us about why is that we find that we're borrowing from what we know to be true about human dialogue, human interaction. I think you referenced indigenous cultures, right? We know from the wisdom of the ages that bringing people together in small groups to talk about their lived experiences, right? This is really key. Talking about their experiences, not their opinions, right? Because experiences, while we may have different experiences, I can't debate, right, that your experience is your experience, and you can't tell me that my experience is not my experience, right? So if we're engaging folks in conversation around experiences, we see that, again, it increases empathy, trust, and respect. And when we do that at scale across a broader community, we really start to get deep insights into what the needs of the community are. So again, that then creates the conditions for more informed decision-making. There's more transparency. The community sees, right, how their needs and their experiences directly relate to the decisions that are being made. So we have these examples from work in the community outside of MIT, and we've heard sort of calls for support here within the MIT community, individuals who really are looking for opportunities to engage in meaningful discussion, meaningful dialogue around issues that are important to them, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to get started. In my work, I'm often sort of influenced by a quote from the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, who says, "We are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think." And so I think this kind of tying into the desire to dive into a problem objectively, be able to quantify it, be able to come to one rational conclusion about the truth, right, really runs counter to what the lived human experience is. And especially in a place like MIT, where students are so incredibly smart, right, and able to solve some of the most complex problems, we sometimes find that our brains are very efficient computers to help us rationalize our reactions. But the reality is we need to find a way to make space so that our responses, right, to these complex issues are not driven by just our first reaction, our knee-jerk opinion on an issue, but really take the time to reflect on sort of why we react the way we do, and how collectively we can respond in a way that serves the larger needs of the community.
Yeah, and I think that really dovetails Helen's comment about sort of sitting with the problem as well. We want to just open up the floor, and I know, Linda, you have something to say. So as we get some hands up in the room, Linda, you can actually make your response to that.
Well, I just wanted to say that I thought that there's an interesting maybe parallel approach, but it is a distinctive approach, and I think that might be an important thing to just point out, that there's an approach of listening with a view to understanding, which is extremely important in developing empathy and a familiarity. But I think also what we're trying to do in the classroom is actually be open to changing our minds about things, to learning, and in some ways to actually trying to put our feelings to some extent aside. And not that you can ever do that, and of course we come to a discussion with opinions, which is great. You couldn't have an argument if you didn't come with opinions. But I think what we're trying to do, I would say in Concourse, through these debates, is really have students think it's not intolerant to argue with somebody. It's actually the essence of toleration, because what it means is you're taking seriously that that's an opposing view, and maybe you should consider it, and maybe there's a weakness in your own position, and you want to understand it better. But that requires being really open to the arguments that somebody's making, and not just, and in some ways having to, trying to suppress how you feel and what your instinctive response is, so that you can listen to the arguments and actually be open to the possibility that maybe you haven't considered your position fully enough. And that requires a kind of back and forth that can be difficult and uncomfortable. And I guess I'm trying to get students to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable in those conversations.
I'm resisting the urge to dive into
Okay,
really
well, we'll have to,
meaningful-
yeah.
We told them we want to have discussion, but we saw about 4 or 5 hands, so I want to make sure we want to.
Okay, so just a reminder, identify yourself and ask your question.
Lee Fisher, Sloan School. I'm not an expert on the word equity, but when I hear it used, such as Karl in your job title, I wonder, what does equity mean to you? Does it mean equal opportunity, or does it mean equal outcome?
Yeah, I don't want to get into. I really don't know the semantics of equity. As you know, I'm not a traditional diversity officer. I'm an engineer by training. But when I think about equity, I think about what Nancy Hopkins did in 1999 when she began to look at salaries. She looked at space. She and her colleagues, I think there were 10 or 11 faculty at the time, began to look at the inputs, the resources that were there, and recognize that they were just inequitable, right? In other words, they were not comparable. And so she put together the report in '99. That led to the reports of all the schools in 2002. And as a result of that, now there's, I think every year or every 2 years, we look at salaries by gender, we look at lab space, we look at a number of metrics, and we find that there are no differences in gender among our faculty. So when I think about equity, I really look at making sure that we close those equity gaps, right, that occur between different groups. That's really what I think of. And I just, I note that Nancy Hopkins' work and, of course, later Paula Hammond's work are really the examples for me.
Sounds like equal outcomes.
I'm looking at, so there's a kind of an image that one looks at, which is kind of equity, right? Which looks at, it's not equal. You can't guarantee equal outcomes. There's no way you can guarantee equal outcomes. No one could do that. But what you can do is you eliminate the gaps or the obstacles that one has as a result, going input, as a result of their work. And so making sure that there are no obstacles to one's ability to do their best work, like back to that title. So it's not equal outcomes guaranteed, but it's making sure we eliminate the obstacles to one's achievement of their best work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Frezza, class of '76. I'd like to ask the panel to comment on the inherent conflict between teaching students to have thicker skins and teaching students to be perpetual victims of microaggressions, and how this relates to their ability to have vigorous discourse.
I think, go ahead. Linda, you actually, that was the last statement, right? I think you were.
Yeah, well, I think I agree that we can't do both. And I think we have to make a choice. And I think, we're in this wonderful situation of having 4 years in a kind of a relatively protective environment. And we need to encourage our students to be strong and, and to not be concerned with microaggressions. That's what it means to get an education, is precisely to be challenged. And, I have this joke, which is, if you want to be comfortable, there's an armchair, but that's not a classroom. And I realize that that's difficult. It's not easy for everybody to go into a classroom. And, and I would say that what makes it possible is that you begin, which we do at the beginning of the semester, by talking about why we have free speech, what the point is, why we have these conversations, and above all, that the reason they're here at a university is that they have a privileged opportunity to explore these questions. And what the mission of the university is is the pursuit of knowledge. And if we have that shared goal, if what we're all in the process for is to get some clarity and better understanding, then I think we do approach it differently. We're not just saying things to hurt people, because we're all in it to understand something. You know, get as much out of these 4 years or more as they can.
I think I want to reject the binary that you suggest. I think that to really support students in reaching their full potential as citizens of the world means supporting them in developing the emotional and mental flexibility to be able to engage in meaningful dialogue across differences. So one of the reasons why we focus so much on opinions versus experiences versus opinions is that our opinions are informed by our experiences. And so if we just engage in that percussive discussion of, sort of sharing our opinions back and forth, our tendency is to then use our powerful computer brain to draw all kinds of false conclusions about who you are because of those opinions, right? As opposed to if a discussion has room for sharing what is the experience that informs your opinion, and it might be knowledge, it might be lived experience, right? But all of our opinions have some foundation in our personal experience. And by being able to talk about that, not just opinions, we have the ability to change each other's mind. That's really when that happens. And to expand our understanding and viewpoint that no two people have the same experience of the world, right? And so I think I think we would probably disagree about what is a microaggression and does it matter, does it not matter? But in terms of, students who are resilient enough to engage in meaningful dialogue, I think that's sort of what you mean by a thick skin. But students who are also aware enough to recognize that there's a power dynamic, my experience is different than your experience, the assumptions that I make about your identity impact you, whether I'm conscious of that or not, right? This is all part of the holistic kind of ability to navigate the complexity of our current world.
Very good point. Excellent.
Yeah, I'm Don Lamp, class of '78, and Karl Reid, welcome, you're one of us. And we're happy about that. I had a specific question about the DUSP, the Department of Urban Planning. On the website, the landing page goes into a kind of a screed about white supremacy. And some people think that white supremacy is a throwaway term, but to me it means that you're categorizing white people like me as a less than class, which seems to be how we got in the big problem to begin with. But anyway, the website says, we cannot ignore the complicity of planning in structural global human rights abuses such as anti-black racism and white supremacy, and more broadly, legacies of colonialism and exclusions based on race, class, religion, and/or gender. Building communities based on equity and inclusion is planning's duty. How can we have constructive communication when the stake in the ground is that communicators such as me don't count?
So I've just pulled up the website. There's an assumption that, let me just, you're making an assumption that the history and there's no question that this country was founded on principles back in 1787 that protected white landowners, right? That's the Federalist Papers, 1787, to protect the government was established to protect the minority of the opulent. That's what that was written. And so there's no question that and there's no question also our wealth as a country is drawn from hundreds of years of free labor. There's just, you know, if you're running a business and you can not have to pay employees, you'll do pretty well, right? So those legacies continue. But that's more structural than individual, right? So one of the things that the Institute for Social Policy out of Seattle has done is kind of separated individual prejudice and inequities from institutional, from systemic, right? And I know there's a lot of word thrown out there, but when I think about systems, I think about the structures that prevented my father from getting access to the unions, right? When he wanted to, when he came out of the Navy. Those are structures that were in place. Those were laws that prevented him from doing that. And as a result, I'm the second generation. He couldn't get into MIT at the time, but he went to Hampton. But his sons did, so we saw that. And yet, there is also institutional kind of factors, residual, and then they're individual. And I don't want to defend them because I'm not in DUSP, I mean, you know, in terms of that, but it doesn't preclude white individuals from working to continue to dismantle these systems, but also working to ensure that everybody's included in this process. So when I talk about inclusive excellence, I'm talking about white and Jewish and Israeli and others, and male and straight and others to be a part of this, because I think we need to have a community where everybody's voices are felt. So if you reacted to something like that when you see that, that's something that we could address, right? We need to address, because that is your experience, it's your reaction, and it reflects others. But you know, on its surface, it doesn't preclude you're not being a part of what the work that DUSP is doing. So there's a dissonance there. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on this. No, you want to stay away? Okay. Love to talk with you during the break about this, because
They need to get rid of all this language on these websites and talk about inclusion and talk about who's part of the solution instead of that my great-grandparents were part of the problem. So, you know, let's be a little more constructive in our communication.
I agree, and I've been kind of articulating that. I'm working on a paper. My colleague Chad Galtz is working on a paper that really speaks to that, some of that. But this is also about free expression as well, right? This is about their, you know, academic freedom, free expression, et cetera. So I think there's this fine line. I think you and I talked about this in the back, about this fine line. So thank you for sharing it. I'll share this. I'll go back to DUSP and have a conversation.
I don't necessarily want to pursue this line of discussion because it's a little tangential to the panel. So somebody has a question for the panel?
Thank you. My name is Leela. I'm class of 2024. I'm now a staff member with SHAS, and I was a debate fellow with Concourse and a sustained dialogues fellow with Kristen Selheim. I'm curious how you all sort of publicize your events and services in a way that gets people with actually opposing opinions into a room and into dialogue or engagement with each other. I've noticed that a lot about how you speak about some of these services and tends to affect who engages. I know like dialogue versus debate tends to get different people in a room. I know, for example, when I was like president of our sorority system, we were having an issue, and as part of a DEI training, we brought in Kristen Selheim, and her services were absolutely amazing. Sustained dialogue was incredible. But we still had trouble getting like kind of one side of the group engaged with that. And then similarly, when I went to the Free Speech Alliance's Is Sex Binary event, again, a wonderful event. I really appreciated it, but it seemed like in the audience there wasn't as much of the prevailing undergrad opinion represented, and in the Q&A also less represented. So I'm kind of curious how you all address this and how you all make sure that kind of both sides of a debate are actually in a room and actually feel comfortable engaging with each other.
I'll take a first crack at that. That's a great question. That is, and it's a work in progress. It's a thing that our organization is still actively working on. Like a lot of faith communities, when we hold an event, if we just publicize to the people that we know, chances are for our events, 80% of the room will be Christian. And we really won't have that. So we have found we actually just have to be really deliberate about directly inviting people from across the spectrum. We do throw our events open to people that we know that are part of our community, so they're going to be there. But we've actually reached out to, actually it was your predecessor, John Dozier, that I first invited to come to one of our events and said, please invite anybody on your team. And we tried to reach out to other people in the MIT administration to have them there at some of our dialogue events, and we're really gratified that he came and brought team members, and so that's been one way. But you have to be deliberate.
And there's an organization. There's a group of faculty and staff who are pulling together called the Third Space. Danny Fox and a few others, and Linda. Yeah, and Linda's also where we're inviting people from multiple perspectives to come and have break bread together on a weekly basis. And I've seen that pop up. In fact, our office funds that, supports that as well. So it's really hard to mandate this. You will have dialogue. It's not, that's not the way. But I think that what Linda has really hit on was incorporating and embedding it into something that exists already, like the Concourse. I think that's the way, because once that happens, it really opens up an understanding.
Can I just add,
Yeah.
just very quickly, the ways that we've tried to do that, actually Leela knows this well, but the way that we've tried to do this in Concourse is to have upper class students get together and come up with arguments on both sides of an issue. And what we found was that, so they were like plants in the debate audience, and when, especially on an issue where there was kind of an overwhelming uniformity of opinion among the students, or what we thought was an overwhelming uniformity of opinion, we'd have the debate fellows jump in and make an argument or a speech on the other side. And what we noticed was once that happened, more students then kind of, whether they believed it or not, sort of took the chance and made an argument, maybe even something they didn't necessarily believe, but were curious to hear how people would respond to and whether they could come up with that argument. The second thing we've also tried is assigning groups to make an argument. So you get assigned either affirmative or negative, and you just have to kind of try to come up with the best argument you can.
Yes, Steve Baker, class of '84, a member of the MIT Corporation. You had noted there's a challenge to scaling these programs. I'm curious whether you've been able to collect any data that demonstrates the effectiveness of what you're doing. Are these too young, too early? Is it still too early to say? Thank you.
It is a little early to say, at least in my tenure here. I think we have early noticings. We know that we have a direction to row, but I think in terms of data, some of this is it's going to take us a little bit of time to get it really right. So that's what I would propose.
I would just say we've only had a year, but we had a huge jump in applications to Concourse just this year. And of course, that's not data yet, or just minimal. But my sense is that students are actually hungry for this, that they want the permission to be able to explore these issues. I suspect they're a little less fragile than we're all, and the media is all saying they are. I mean, there's some of that, but I think in part it's been encouraged by a sense of fear of how they're going to be, what the repercussions will be. But what we've seen, I think, is that once you give them the opportunity, at least our students have seized it.
And I think that it's a very, very good question. This is why I asked Elena the question earlier, because data matters, right? We can't confuse activity with impact. And so at the end of the day, we're asking questions. So we were looking at for example, the quality of life survey. Every 2 years, MIT does a quality of life survey, and we now can disaggregate by role, by division, by any number of ways. And so one of the things that we're trying to set is, can we see movement in questions of hey, do I feel like I belong to MIT? Reduction in the number of visits to the ombuds person. Reduction in the number of complaints for IDHR, et cetera, et cetera. We're looking at those kinds of metrics to see. Those are proxy metrics, to use a term that my colleague has introduced us to. But I think that's where we got to go, because it's really hard to measure these things. We can't just put a box around a derivation like we did in 801. We really have to we have to see sort of other metrics to move it.
So I know there are a lot of other great questions, because this has been a wonderful discussion, but we're running up on lunch. So let's give this wonderful panel a hand.